John Fetterman is a trust fund kid. He took money from his parents deep into middle age when he decided finally what he would like to do with the rest of his life, which is to be the U.S. Senator from Pennsylvania. The problem is fate intervened and he can now no longer speak. He had a bad stroke and we feel bad about that. Everyone does. But because of that stroke, Fetterman now needs electronic assistance in order to communicate with other people. He can't talk on his own. It's not a right-wing conspiracy theory. It's not QAnon. It's real. In fact, it's so real, his campaign concedes that it's real, that it's true. Fetterman uses a software program to understand the words of those around him and to formulate his responses to those words. In other words, to talk. Now, to be perfectly clear, this software is not a hearing aid. Fetterman doesn't need a hearing aid because he isn't deaf. He's not hearing impaired. Instead, this program takes words and then rearranges them into language that John Fetterman can understand because his brain can no longer do that for him. Now, that's sad. For transhumanists, though, it is thrilling. This is an amazing moment. This is Neil Armstrong on the moon. Here you have one of the most famous politicians in the country merging with a computer. This is the future they imagine. They're thrilled by it. But for everyone else, for the voters of Pennsylvania, for example, it does raise some obvious questions. For example, where exactly does the software end and John Fetterman's consciousness begin? We don't know. We can't know. But it's obvious that Pennsylvania could very well be sending a computer program to the Senate where inevitably it will be hacked. Yesterday, MSNBC sat down with John Fetterman and his thinking machine to assess where the man ends and the machine begins. And the initial impressions were not at all encouraging.
We had a monitor set up so that he could read my questions because he still has lingering auditory processing issues as a result of the stroke, which means he has a hard time understanding what he's hearing. Now, once he reads the question, he's able to understand. You'll hear he also still has some problems, some challenges with speech. And I'll say, Katie, that just in some of the small talk prior to the interview, before the closed captioning was up and running, it did seem that he had a hard time understanding our conversations.
Well, good for her for admitting that. That's a rival channel. Don't watch a lot of MSNBC, but she should tell viewers that, and she did. And what she just told you is that before the machine was turned on, John Fetterman could not understand human language, not even small talk. But once the machine was plugged in, he sounded, or the machine sounded, nearly human. But don't worry. Everything's going to be fine in the Senate as long as there's not a power outage. It's not like the electricity ever goes down in this country. We definitely have enough renewables to keep John Fetterman voting for the next 6 years. Better build more wind farms. That's the plan. But once again, to the credit of the MSNBC reporter, she did ask a follow-up. How do we know your thinking machine isn't going to break, John Fetterman? Can we see a doctor's report on this? Here's how that exchange went.
Can voters trust that you will be able to do this job on day one?
Yeah, of course.
So you say you're on the road to full recovery, but right now, voters really have to take your word for it. We've asked for your medical records. We've asked to have a conversation with someone from your medical team, to interview your physician. You've declined those requests. Why?
Well, I feel like we have been very transparent in a lot of different ways. When our doctor has already given a letter saying that I'm able to serve and to be running.
I mean, respectfully, that letter from your physician, that was 6 months ago. Don't voters deserve to know your status now?
Being in front of thousands and thousands of people and having interviews and getting around all across Pennsylvania, that gives everybody and the voters decide, if they think that it's really the issue.
So he's reading that off a screen. And by the way, we're taking him at his word that there's not a staffer backstage typing out the answers because he himself can't formulate them. Now, again, you can feel deeply sympathetic to John Fetterman. That's sad to watch. But this is a guy who wants to run the federal government in a body of 100, the most powerful legislative body in the world. And he wants to be a member of it. So over at CBS, reporter Ed O'Keefe asked the obvious question, quote, will Pennsylvanians be comfortable with someone representing them who had to conduct a TV interview this way? Now, that's a mild way to put it, but it's certainly a fair observation. The guy's reading his answers off a screen with the reporter 3 feet away. That's the definition of impairment. And again, this is a very serious job. But others in the media scoffed at the idea that was a problem at all. In fact, far from being a problem, it was an asset. Because if the equity agenda means anything, it means that incompetent people ought to be in charge. That's equity. As New York City Councilwoman Rita Joseph put it, questions about Fetterman's profound brain damage are, quote, incredibly ableist. Ableist. We desperately need more diversity in elected office, and that includes people with speech impediments. Well, we desperately need that. That is absolutely right. But actually, we're not talking about a speech impediment. She's telling us he's got a stutter, just like Joe Biden. Remember when they told you that Joe Biden's dementia was just a stutter? But of course, a speech impediment would not prevent Fetterman or Biden from understanding other people's speech. Huh. Investigative reporter Hunter Walker, who writes for Rolling Stone and The New Yorker, answered that question with a question of his own. Quote, would they treat a deaf person like this for needing assistance? Oh, so if you have questions about John Fetterman, you hate the deaf. You're a hearingist, bigot. We're going to close down your bank account at JP Morgan, ableist. But again, it's not really relevant to the Senate race in Pennsylvania because, once again, John Fetterman doesn't have hearing problems. He's not deaf. This isn't deafness. This is brain damage. So the Independent's Eric Michael Garcia tried to tie up that loose end, and he used an analogy to do it. That's how really smart people talk. How is this any different, he wrote, from Tammy Duckworth or Madison Cawthorn needing a wheelchair? Oh, so John Fetterman being unable to talk without reading it off a screen, either from the software or from one of his staffers backstage, is exactly the same as being wounded in defense of your own country. It's a war injury. And then John Fetterman's wife, who came into this country as an illegal alien, by the way, wondered the same thing. And we're quoting, truly appalling. Have these journalists never heard of the Americans with Disabilities Act? Really curious to learn how they feel about wheelchairs and glasses. End quote. Really? So your questions about John Fetterman's mental health, the acuity of his brain, his ability to talk and listen and reason, use his higher faculties, those questions are banned by the Americans with Disabilities Act because he's not just an incompetent guy trying to take over the country. No, he's disabled. Over at Vox, Ian Millhiser said he knows exactly how Fetterman's bigoted critics view people with eyeglasses, like the Khmer Rouge. Quote, is it the position of NBC News that a senator with glasses cannot be trusted in office because they use assistive technology to accommodate their disability? It's so unbelievable. Not only can you not ask questions about the guy you're supposed to vote for and whether he can actually represent you in the United States Senate, you're not allowed. He's fine, and by the way, the fact he's not fine is the reason to vote for him. So they're hitting you from both sides. Vote for him because he's so profoundly disabled, and we don't have enough of those in the Senate. But if you note that he's profoundly disabled, you're a bigot. Woo! They got you coming and going.